Okay, I believe we're live. So, to all our audience who are joining live, welcome to the final episode of season one of Human Mode Conversation. I'm extremely happy, Jennifer Moss, to have you as my guest. We were just talking before this, before going live, and we're talking about this idea that probably this session is going to be like a recap of somehow everything we talked about. As I told you, I started Human Mode Conversation because I've seen and observed how overwhelmed leaders and employees feel in this time. And I just thought that creating conversations, inviting different people with different perspectives, is just going to at least maybe bring a bit of confidence to all of us, bring some insights, and hopefully some like new mindset shift. Because I think that this is where we're at. We need some mindset, paradigm shifts. So this is basically the goal of the human mode. And definitely after this, we're just going to see how we're going to evolve in season two. But Jennifer, thank you so much. I'm going to call you Jen from now on. Thank
Yep.
you so much for joining. I think me and you, we are connected on LinkedIn from
Yeah.
many years ago, like 7 or 8 years ago.
Mhm.
You've actually written a book 10 years ago called Unlocking Happiness at Work. Then in 22, you actually wrote about burnout epidemic during the
Yes.
pandemic. And now you've just written your third book, like why we're here. Yes, why are we here?
Why are we here? Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that this session we're going to be, because I have different guests that we talked about AI, what's going to look like, the future of work. But you're an expert in work culture. You're a work culture strategist. So I want to really dedicate this session to somehow talk about the cultural infrastructure
Mhm.
of the future of work, of this transition time, considering the fact that me and you both have been working on the concepts of culture for many years, and we've seen that it changed from ping pong tables and free beer to
Right.
to
Yeah.
now more like a bit meaningful stuff. So tell me about what you're observing now when we talk about culture.
We were talking about this just a few minutes ago that we are having conversations around mental health and well-being and wellness like we've never had before. So that's a really good sign. And we're talking about burnout and burnout prevention. When I wrote The Burnout Epidemic, it wasn't something that was widely discussed. There was, research like Maslow and Leiter and Susan Jackson who were really pursuing the conversation, but a lot of people were kind of rolling their eyes. And then when the World Health Organization identified burnout as institutional stress or occupational, it was an occupational phenomena. Again, it brought more of these conversations forward. So there's been a huge shift, obviously, in just the amount of conversation. Do I think that we have nailed it when it comes to really understanding how we improve culture? I think it really ends up being that there's great leadership that has strong intuition on making sure that the hygiene needs are met. And I talk about that in the book, that the fundamental stuff that often is skipped in organizations that aren't doing well-being right, it's all downstream with more yoga and more subsidized gym memberships and self-care. But what really good leaders, I think, are doing right now when it comes to culture is just making sure that things are managed from a hygiene standpoint. You're being paid properly. You have psychological and physical safety. You feel a sense of community at work. You feel like there's a sense of justice and fairness. Your workload's managed. Those types of things are really what set up a good culture, even though they're not as sexy. They're the things that I think, and what I've seen, obviously in the research and in the work I do, you see that those are the things that end up creating these great culture, because then people can optimize and they can motivate if they have their basic needs met.
But Jen, the challenge is that, you know, you brought the concept of psychological safety, like, fairness, justice. Like, I remember back in 2019 when we were talking about this stuff, everyone was just like, no, like, please. There were not, no one was ready about this.
Hmm.
Now we're hearing more of these conversations, but how come all the research, all these amazing books are written, and still we see all these challenges in the workforce? Like, what are we missing?
This, I think you and I would both agree. This is the most frustrating part of I think for anyone in this space, this is the most frustrating part is that, for organizations that are really doing a great job of making database decisions, they use CRMs, they're looking at sales targets, they're measuring everything,
Mm-hmm.
and they're following that data and making database decisions that are good for their organization. It optimizes their organization. But when it comes to people, when it comes to culture, they look at data as as sort of like it's arbitrary. I'm going to choose what data I want to believe in, and then I'm going to go against it when that doesn't suit my vision or the way I like to lead
Mm-hmm.
because I'm comfortable leading in a certain way. And this is so shocking to me because human resources are such a huge cost to organizations that if anything we should be tracking, measuring, and responding to when it comes to the data we're gathering, it should be around people.
Yes.
But we are not, and I don't know why. I would love to have an answer for that. There's lots of good research that shows that it depends on the leadership persona. There's a lot of need to share, to shareholders to be able to prove that you're making these decisions so that you can have a quick return and a more beneficial return to shareholders. But again, all the data says that the more we invest in well-being and a healthy culture, the more that it actually leads to higher revenue, higher growth, higher, levels of competition. So I think what we need to do is make it easier for leaders to understand that it's not as hard as they think it is,
Yes.
and that it really is about empowering managers and leaders and people that are working directly with people to have the permission to support them on these on gathering data and then supporting what they learn about their people.
And Jen, do you think that, because we're talked about like during these conversations, we talked about internet time, we talked about social media and cell phone times. Do you think, and we talked about obviously COVID and all the opportunities that it somehow presented, however, we didn't necessarily use it. Do you think that this time of AI or technological disruption, it's too big for leaders to do business as usual? Like, do you think finally this might be the moment that we cannot function from with the, I don't know, 20th, mid 20th century leadership styles?
I definitely feel like we've hit a massive disruption. I've been saying the pandemic was actually a bigger disruption than AI, than email, than the factory. I mean, it's the office. It's a massive disruption that no one really wants to think about anymore because we have related trauma to it. We don't want to think about fighting over toilet paper ever again. I mean, it was just so awful. And
Mhm.
yet it changed people's experiences of life and work. And I mentioned this in the book, which is really at the root of why are we here, is that when you face your mortality, which we did collectively, globally, all at once, and it was enduring because it was over a year, 2 years. Some countries had 18-month to 2-year lockdowns. We had fundamental rewiring of our minds, our brains completely have changed. They shifted. And so we have to either rewire it back to the way that we were before, which is not likely because we have, new understandings of what work looks like, or we have to embrace the fact that the world has changed and our priorities have changed. So, we used to be so identified with work. That was who we were. Status was so important. Financial compensation was the most important thing that we cared about when it came to really a lot of motivation. It was money was always at the top of that list of what motivates people. And when you ask now, it's totally different. It's work-life balance, it's purpose, it's meaning, it's hopefulness. And so if you're not delivering on that, you'll just see maybe if you press it for a period of time, you're going to see output. but you're going to see that that's not sustainable, and people are already demonstrating that by, high performers leaving for other types of roles that provide that, or you see our younger generation opting out entirely of this path. You see mature workers going into early retirement. So, and women, thinnest executive pipeline we've seen, and it's because they're exiting the workforce. So we're going to see this play out. Maybe it's not right now, but it is playing out, that people are saying, no, I'd rather have a different life than,
Mhm.
the one that you're offering me in this workplace.
And I love it. Last week I our guest talked about something called like agency for people and how much this world of technology is somehow helping
Mm.
us to be, to have that agency around our careers and having different opportunities. And if organizations don't necessarily recognize that, they're going to just, have a big challenge ahead with like retaining their talents. So my next question is that how do you think so like the leaders are now listening, okay? They just already up to here overwhelmed, like
Right.
they just very uncertain. I love the word phobo. They're like having this fear of becoming obsolete. They don't
Mm.
even know if they're gonna be there in 2 years or not.
Mhm.
Like what would be some of your like invitations for them?
You're right in seeing the CEO turnover is so high. In 2022 is the highest, 2023 actually, it was just after the Great Resignation. CEOs all of a sudden had their Great Resignation. It was like they saw them through kind of the worst of it, and they were so burned out that they, exhausted and left, opted out on their own, or there was turnover, moving to other organizations, or even just we saw a lot of CEOs starting up their own companies. And I wanted to go back just to what you said, even around technology, making it easier for people to then start their own company. We see an uptick in startup activity. We've seen an uptick in small businesses because you don't need a team of 10 anymore. You can do a lot as a solopreneur or an entrepreneur on your own. So that's another thing we need to be thinking about from technology and empowerment. But for CEOs that are looking at, what do I do? How do I, have bravery? Because there's so much on CEOs right now. There's so many, there's so many external pressures that they don't even have control over, that they feel like they have to answer to. And so brave leadership is really, we're seeing that less and less right now, where you're just going to go off on your own and say, okay, I'm going to take this long-term approach, because measuring well-being, investing in culture, and seeing it play out isn't just an 18-month, 2-year cycle, which is the CEO lifespan right now for, inside of these organizations. So it really is about working with the people that are going to be influencers and stakeholders, and the people on your board, and having them align with you on that vision, with a clear understanding that metrics will have to come with that, but that it isn't just a 6 month to 1 year strategy. This is, I want you to be with me on this journey for 5 years, but I will deliver, which
Mhm.
we know that if you make those investments, it delivers. But you need to be ready to take that stand and work through, the challenges that you're going to be met with along the way.
But Jen, the question that I like, or at least the concern that I hear a lot from leaders, and I'm sure you actually hear it a lot in your work as well, is that we don't have time. Like we are like bombarded with like delivering projects. We need to perform. So like this idea of performing while transforming, like the idea of short term versus long term, like what is that mindset gonna look like? How does that gonna look like on a daily basis to just make sure that we're good short term, but also we are transforming or we're just building that infrastructure long term?
This is such an important question, because you've probably seen this too. And in any conversation you have with a CFO or a COO about the operationalizing of culture change, there's just this deer in headlights fear of what it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. And when you really look at the research and the evidence, it isn't one person or even just a few C levels at the top saying this is what culture looks like. It's really about manager and direct, reports and giving permission to that sort of in those small groups to be able to, be permitted to live by a strategy or a culture outline that you've provided them. And so that is really where, we get caught up in that. It has to be now we add a value or we bring in, all of this, extra programming, or we invest in technology to solve it. It's actually much better if you have a manager that understands how to ask questions about how people are feeling, that it's in the day to day and the week to week experience of your relationship with your manager, and having the ability to be able to learn what your team needs, which is going to be very different in certain personas like sales and production environments versus, copywriting, or even in compliance or accounting. You're going to see very different personas in these areas. So managers and knowing, okay, this is what the leadership have provided me with, that autonomy to be able to, be nimble, to be able to, learn and respond in real time to the people that are working with me, so that I have the real connection on culture. And it's usually the solutions, or the ways that we solve this are usually cheap or free. I mean, it really is not expensive. These interventions are so often just about relations and healthy, productive relationships and building those out, and making sure people aren't overworked, that they're not burning out, that you're, checking in on them.
Yeah.
Those are the things that you need, is support, but then the ability to execute is at the manager level. And we do see that often, that break, that gap between what leaders and managers really do because they see it, and they're sandwiched between policy that is broken and failing that they can't then execute on.
That's actually very interesting because, in our work in like fostering psychological safety, we also talk a lot about the idea of intentionality, like just be intentional about creating these moments of connection,
Mhm.
building these practices of like, changing behaviors, doing check-ins, like
Mhm.
creating that psychological safety where people can ask questions, even like bringing awareness to your meetings to see is someone dominating the conversation. And interestingly enough, so many of our clients sometimes come to us and they say, can we have this instead of 3 months in like a 2 day like
Yeah.
workshop? I said, no, you can't. It's like going to the gym. Like, you have,
Right.
like there
Yes.
is that small consistent commitment that will make the change. And I love this idea that you're sharing and confirming, because it is
Mhm.
not a it's not like overwhelming. Like if you think that, okay, I'm just going to go to this meeting with these three questions, or being more curious, or changing the language that
Right.
I'm going to give the feedback, it's not rocket science, and it will actually change things.
It does. I mean, a big thing that I keep saying in these conversations is you can change culture in 20 minutes or less. Every week it's about making sure that people are stepping away from their desk to have lunch with other people. I mean, 20 minutes once a week of having lunch with a coworker. There's been all this great research out of Cornell that says it improves morale, it increases team bonding, retention. It's the things that we think, oh, that's not rigorous enough. It's
Yeah.
not complicated enough. So it can't be the real solution.
Yeah.
We have to, as humans, we have to think that the more complex, the more rigor, therefore that makes it a better solution. And that's not true. It really isn't just making sure that you are protecting people's time to be able to be social. Things like our meeting fatigue. We increased meetings by 252% in over just a year. And that's just Teams meetings alone. So not even Zoom or all the other meetings that we're having. So just Teams meetings alone. And you think that people want to be social at the end of the day, or feel like they can step away for lunch if they're in back-to-back meetings where they can't even, go to the bathroom, and they're running from one place to the next. The last thing they want to do is have lunch with someone for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's this time poverty that is really making it so that all those other little things that we used to enjoy at work, the fun that you had every once in a while at work, has been completely stripped away. And it's rituals that need to be built back, and these very simple solutions need to be encouraged versus, oh, I need to invest in a million or two or $5 million training program. You need to have people be taught like what you're teaching them is this is habit building. This is hygiene. This is us, building it over time. And managers need to be trained how to do that,
Yes.
but they also need to be given the time and be able to give their team the time to actually invest in these 20 minutes every single week.
I couldn't agree with you, and everything that you shared. And I think that exactly to your point, like maybe in our personal lives, we're also stuck with this idea that the trust and love and relationship happens in these big moments or grand gestures, where in fact they're really like those day-to-day things. So like, but it is like a big shift, for leaders. Say, you know what, don't spend $200,000 on the Christmas party, but instead
Yeah.
just like, maybe free up people for 30 minutes every week so that they can actually design their own conversations and connect with each other. Like that might have a better result for you. But then, like, Jen, I want to move to, like, I want to just make a turn and talk about AI and the future of work. Because everything now that we're talking about will have another layer of complexity, and that is technology and agents. And me and you, we already, I think, already quite traumatized by work by work cultures. So we're just thinking, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, like how can we just make sure that things are going to work out with another layer of technology and, like, infrastructure.
We already have techno stress. We're already so burdened by the amount of technology that we're using in our day. And a new really great study came out that said that people are actually working more. Their workload has increased with AI because we're still learning how it fits into our
Mhm.
work life. Is there value to it? There's been some very fascinating research that's showing that we probably won't have this complete reduction of, no one working from AI, that we haven't actually seen how it's going to replace all jobs, that, and so there's been this very big conversation that has created that FOBO, that fear of becoming obsolete for lots of employees. But I think what needs to happen is leaders and managers and teams really understanding what is the why of AI, what is the point, what is the purpose of it, what is
Mhm.
the strategy when it comes to their own future in the organization, how are we reskilling and upskilling, how are we using AI and delivering on its promise of giving my job more creativity, or making me be able to adapt these new skills like analytical skills, which the World Economic Forum has said is the most important skill that we need for employees right now. So AI needs to have, I think it needs to have better communication about what it is and how we're using it, and getting more feedback from employees about what they're really using it for. I see a lot of people that I've talked to just at events and when I'm speaking, and they come up to me and they say, that because I have this part that I talk about AI, and they say, like AI is doing everything right now that I could be doing, and I don't want to say anything about it because I could lose my job. I'm supposed to be doing these other things like
Mhm.
I used to be doing the input with data, but the goal was for me to be able to analyze it and develop those skills. But that hasn't happened because no one has time to do any of this, upskilling and retraining. So this is where I feel that gap is that we've just had this attitude about AI that we have to adopt or die, or
Mhm.
we're not going to be competitive if we don't have AI. But we went way too far, too fast, without understanding how it really is going to be implicated. and how employees are going to use it. And so there needs to be, I think, a reset in the communication around AI. And then making sure that we deliver on the promise of AI of time saving. If it saved you time, you shouldn't be asking employees who've done their work more efficiently to just add on more work, because the point of AI is for us to not have to
Mhm.
work so hard. So if that's the case, then give us our time back and making sure that we have work-life balance in response to using this tool effectively.
And and I love what you brought, Jen, about analytical thinking and 2030 World Economic Forum, like, like graph and visual. Like, we're talking a lot about the idea of culture, like cultural infrastructure. And then we look at 2030 and everything that we're always been told that, oh my goodness, soft skills, they're not important. It's all about hard, hard, hard. Even the word is just like quite condescending. We can call it human skills, social skills, strategic
Right.
skills.
Yeah.
Now they are at the forefront of like leadership or like employees and like that edge or differentiator that you can have in the age of AI. Like, how would you suggest that leaders or organizations that always somehow push these, skill sets aside, all of a sudden somehow embrace it during this turmoil time? Like, how would you think that they can just start even thinking about it?
I think this is another example of we need to have direct managers finding out within their teams what is the level of understanding of AI, how people are using it, making sure you're doing a skills audit and seeing if every person on the team is really building up other skills as they're utilizing AI. It should be always in tandem. We need to have people feel curious about AI versus afraid of it. We want people to, have monthly meetings where someone brings in a new tool that they've tested and talk about, what they learned from it. Suggest, if it's a viable tool for us to be bringing in organizations or not, really empowering individuals within the organization to spend time with it and articulate with it and learn about it, but then making sure that if there are gaps, and this is where we see ageism, we assume that mature workers have less understanding of AI than young people, but we're seeing a lot of young people that just that's not something that they necessarily have adopted in their personal lives. Whereas you see some mature workers really well attuned to using AI. So it's about removing the bias, getting a really good understanding of where people are at, and then seeing what their goals are. There was a stat around mature workers that had taken early retirement, and it was a very large data set, and 40% of them said that they would stay if they had been trained in these new technologies. So we're just, we have this bias that as people are getting, closer to retirement, that they don't still want to be upskilled, where we could hold on to a huge group of really smart and talented people by just making sure that we understand how much they want to learn and providing them that continuing education and curiosity around technology.
But Jen, the question that, I'm actually like quite concerned about or I'm thinking a lot about is the idea of analytical thinking, like sharing our judgments, like, like I've been working a lot on the concept of psychological safety, and we know how low it's being, like, it's not really being integrated within like systems. So now we're talking about like that next level of risk taking to
Right.
share what we think about this AI generated work or what we think about the biases that it's being built in the system or just, and it can be for like, like it could involve ageism, racism, like different kind of minorities. Like where do you think that cultural infrastructure is sitting? Like how can we make sure that, okay, do we have that climate for curiosity to be cultivated, for questions to be asked, for analysis to be shared? Like how can we make sure of that?
This is such an important topic because the there is 50% of the workforce right now that feel like AI is going to take over their jobs. They feel like they're going to become obsolete and they don't have any idea where they fit in the organization. So that psychological safety is absent for half of your workforce.
Mm.
And a lot of that has to do with communications around AI. So we do need to have, people, peers that are supporting the learning and making sure that you're able to have those comfortable conversations with someone around not knowing the tool or being able to put your hand up to say, like these people that come to me secretly saying, I can't put my hand up because I don't want to let anyone know that I'm not really working. We're seeing a lot of task masking with people where they're pretending they're working and now everyone's in the office. Again, it's like, I have to pretend that I'm doing these tasks that AI is doing. This is very problematic for organizations. The psychological safety piece tied to this is crucial because you're going to have people not using the tool. You're not going to get all that investment that you've put into this technology is you imagine even 50%, just 50%. Those are the people that feel obsolete, but there's lots of other people that have other reasons why they're not engaging with
Mhm.
it. You're only going to get a quarter, of engagement in the technology that you just spent millions or billions of dollars in. So
Mhm.
we do need to make sure that there is a strategy on psychological safety for people to be able to say, like, I want to be curious, but I don't necessarily want to go talk to my boss. I want to be able to go into a class that a peer is teaching, or that we have very routine learning opportunities for
Mhm.
people, that it's celebrated, that people have the option to understand the technology better, that they have opportunities, maybe it's anonymously, to share how they're feeling about the AI adoption,
Yes.
creating ways so that bias and ageism and prejudice is not coming into the learning that the organization is trying to gain.
And I totally agree with you that during this transformation time, it's key because we're seeing that how people they don't raise their hands and say, you know what, I don't even understand what we're doing, or I don't
Right.
know, I just need help learning this. Like it's just that it's definitely in the long run, but even in the short run, going through this transition, we see that the more people feel safe to come
Yeah.
and talk, the more they're adaptable and willing to change and, go through that transformation. So, if we want to recap, obviously we talked a lot about this cultural infrastructure, talking about the new mindset about the importance of culture and looking at culture as that baseline that we can create for
Mhm.
like these changes that we're dealing with. What would you hope to see if you're thinking about 2035, like in teams or in cultures? Like you say, why are we here? Like what do you think, what do you hope to see actually within our organizations?
So I actually love that you use the word hope. It's the first chapter in my book. And, I really believe hope is a strategy. I've interviewed lots of, you know, senior leaders of military that said hope is the only strategy, because how do you ask people to risk their lives for a mission if they don't feel hopeful that they're going to see that mission achieved? And one of the things that we are really desiring, and Gallup is showing this up right now, that hopeful leaders are how people feel engaged right now. They're really desperate for that. And we build hope by making people feel that their goals can be achieved. And we can't right now because people are so myopic. They're living in a place of stress. A lot of us are in fight, flight, freeze all the time because of everything that's happening around us. Really understanding the psychological barriers to people's motivation right now is making people feel like it's small incremental goals that we celebrate, and we demonstrate that there's wins there, that we're getting much smaller in our ways of thinking about success, and just building up trust over time, because that lack of trust is making people feel less hopeful. We need to rebuild that. because there were a lot of things that were given to people in the pandemic, well-being investment, well-being, and DEI investment. We had investment in, in just flexibility, and that's been clawed back in a lot of ways. So to build hope is to say I'm staying true to my word. I'm making small commitments that I know that I can provide you with these quick wins, and having people feel like they can see the path forward, that it's about micro goals, but it's also about a long-term strategy for where each individual fits inside that organization in the future. And that's a lot more career pathing and creating co-creating plans to see what do I want to achieve in my career, and having leadership and managers support that. And then I think over time we'll continue to build that trust, but that it is going to take time, and that leaders have to be patient. And so that's really what I think is going to be a win for the future of work. And those organizations, I'm already seeing it really play out, which is wonderful. There's been a lot of leaders that are going back to sort of nostalgic ways of thinking about their brand, like Starbucks, and Verizon, for example, is pushing back on AT&T by saying, I'm going to commit to flexibility because I believe that's a future. So brave leaders that exude hope and trust and build trust, I think they're going to actually end up leapfrogging all of these organizations that are focused on just immediate results for shareholders. They're going to end up realizing that's not a sustainable strategy.
And I love what you shared about like being hopeful and also like have those long-term visions and goals, but also recognizing the small wins. It's very interesting what you've shared, Jen, when we ask people what kills psychological safety or what prevents people from performing, like those lack of recognitions, not
Mhm.
talking about a small wins, getting into meetings and only talking about what's not
Right.
working rather
Mhm.
than what is working. Like these are just small nuances, small actions and rituals that can change like dynamics and cultures drastically. So I'm
Yes.
so happy that you just brought that up. Do you want to like finish with a final invitation for anyone listening to this?
I think that right now, my latest book, the revision of Unlocking Happiness at Work and Why Are We Here, goes back to what I was saying, way back in 2012 or 13 when the first book came out. It was this idea of, we can choose happiness. And I've gone back to say it's not that we can choose happiness at all times. That's a privilege, but we can, choose kindness and choose happiness for others. And sometimes in this world of chaos and instability and vulnerability and feeling like, okay, we just need to hit those measures and those metrics because they really matter, I really look to leaders to take a pause and say, how do we have a more compassionate way of thinking about strategy that also still will bring this organizational, success, and will still feel like we are, we're a very strong organization with lots to demonstrate from a ROI standpoint. But how can we do it a bit more compassionately? And I think that is where we are seeing gaps, and I'd love to see that gap close, because we can have both. It's a both and. You can be extremely successful. You can do that consciously. We can have conscious capitalism, which is both success and treating people, in a very human way. And we can choose kindness and happiness for those people, and then profits will follow.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jen. I believe if like I mean, you had so many words that are going to stay with me, but definitely hopefulness, intention, compassion, human centered leadership, small actions, like a different way of leading. I think this is something that we just all need. And I hope that anyone listening to this conversation will grab your books, will follow your work, because definitely this is the vision that we need for the future of work. And with people like
Right.
yourself, we can just make that into a reality. So thank you so much, Jen,
Yes.
for
Thank
joining us. And I hope that we can just reconnect again, maybe in a few years, and say that things are better.
Things are better. I'm hopeful, which is important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, for joining our
Thank
conversation. And
you.
thank you, everyone, joining us live. Bye.
Thank you.